Comparative adjectives.
The comparative form of adjective is used to compare two people, two places, or two things. For example, John is taller than Jose. Here we are comparing John and Jose. Boston is colder than Miami. Here we're comparing two places, Boston and Miami. Sneakers are more comfortable than dress shoes. Here we are comparing two things, two different kinds of shoes. It should be noted that we can compare most descriptive adjectives, but there are some adjectives that we cannot compare because they are not gradable. They don't have degrees. So, for example, last. You can't be more last. Impossible. Something cannot be more impossible. Complete. Something cannot be more complete. So the comparative form is not usually used with all adjectives. Only adjectives that can be considered to have more or less of some property, some characteristic. Making the comparative form of descriptive adjectives is a little bit complicated in English. There are two different ways to do this. Sometimes we attach the suffix er to the adjective, and sometimes we precede the adjective with the word more, or in some cases less. Which way to form the comparative form of the descriptive adjective depends to some extent on the number of syllables in the adjective. Most one-syllable adjectives form their comparative form by adding the suffix er. So we have examples: tall, taller; nice, nicer; soft, softer. Most two-syllable words that end in the letter y add the suffix er. Heavy, heavier; pretty, prettier; goofy, goofier. And most two-syllable words that have stress, the force of the pronunciation, on the first syllable and which end in the letters ly, ow, or le form their comparative form by adding the suffix er. So, for example, deadly, deadlier; friendly, friendlier; narrow, narrower; shallow, shallower; noble, nobler; simple, simpler. So you can see that to decide whether to use that er suffix, we have to count the number of syllables, and we have to look at where stress is and what letters are used at the end of the word. A little bit complicated. The second way to form the comparative form of descriptive adjectives is to precede them with the word more, or in some cases less. This is done with most two-syllable adjectives and all adjectives of three or more syllables. So we see examples: comfortable, more comfortable; interesting, more interesting; difficult, less difficult. This would be similar to the way to form the comparative in Spanish, preceding the adjective with más. So, more comfortable, más cómodo; more interesting, más interesante. It should be noted that less, like in less difficult, is not used with all descriptive adjectives. So there are some descriptive adjectives like the word light, not heavy, light. We don't usually say less light. Less preceding a descriptive adjective doesn't work with all descriptive adjectives. Also, as you can see on the slide, there are some two-syllable adjectives that can use either the suffix er or the word more. So with a word like handsome, you can say handsomer or more handsome. With the word quiet, you can say quieter or more quiet. Since these do not follow the normal rules for forming the comparative form, They have to be learned basically by practice. As you use these adjectives, you should become familiar with which ones permit both forms. You have to learn these exceptions by using them, really. Some other exceptions to the norm. There are a few one-syllable words that in fact do not use the suffix er but are preceded by the word more. So we don't say funner, it's more fun, more bored, more scared. So here we have some additional exceptions to the rule for forming the comparative form of descriptive adjectives. And finally, to add to our list of exceptions, we have a few irregular comparatives. The comparative form of good is better. The comparative form of bad, worse. The comparative form of far, farther. It's interesting to note that both good and bad in Spanish also are irregular. So the exceptions to the rules and the irregulars are things that you have to learn really by using them and practicing, since they don't follow the rules. In addition to the words more or less or the suffix er, it is sometimes necessary to use the word than after comparative adjectives. If only one of the two people, two places, or two things is mentioned in the comparative part of the sentence, do not use the word than after the adjective. For example, I like both dresses, but the black dress is prettier. In the second part, only the black dress is mentioned, so we only use the comparative prettier. If both people or both places or things are mentioned in the sentence, we have to use the word than after the adjective. For example, Bill is taller than his brother. We mentioned the two people being compared, Bill and his brother, so we need to use the word than in addition to the word taller. An iPhone is more expensive than an iPod. We are comparing two things, iPhone and iPod. Because they are both mentioned, in addition to using more expensive, we need to use the word than. And the final example, golf is less exciting than basketball. Here, again, we are comparing two things, golf and basketball. Because they are both mentioned in the sentence, in that part of the sentence, in addition to less exciting, we need the word than. So, if you have a comparative adjective in a part of the sentence and both people, both places, both things are mentioned, then in addition to using the comparative form, we must follow the adjective by the word than. When writing the comparative form of adjectives, there are some spelling rules that need to be followed. If an adjective that requires the suffix er ends in a silent letter e before adding the er, then we only add the r. We don't add another e. So for example, safe, S-A-F-E, safer, S-A-F-E-R, late, L-A-T-E, later, L-A-T-E-R. So if it has a silent E, an E that is not pronounced, we simply add the R. This is also true for those two-syllable adjectives that use the ER suffix. So if you have a two-syllable adjective that takes the ER suffix, if it ends in a silent letter E, we simply add the R. So with simple, since it ends in silent E, we add R. In noble, since it ends in a silent E, we add R. If an adjective that requires the suffix ER ends in one vowel letter followed by one consonant letter, but not the consonants C, K, W, X, I, we double the final consonant letter before adding ER. So fat, we have a single consonant letter preceded by a single vowel letter. We double the T. Big, we have a single consonant letter preceded by a single vowel letter. We double the G. Slow, we have a single consonant letter preceded by a single vowel letter, but it's one of those letters that we do not double. So in the case of slow, we just leave the one W. Note that the rule is if the word ends in a single consonant letter preceded by a single vowel letter. If the descriptive adjective ends in a single consonant letter, but if that consonant is preceded by two vowel letters, we do not double the final consonant. So for example, with deep, there are two letter E's before the P. We don't double the P. In the word fast, we have two consonant letters. Because the word ends in two consonant letters, we don't double the last consonant letter. It should be noted that the doubling of the consonant letter is a spelling rule. It has absolutely no effect on pronunciation. We never pronounce double consonants in English. We only pronounce the consonant one time. We don't pronounce it two times. One additional spelling rule for descriptive adjectives is that adjectives that take the er suffix, if they end in y, most change the y letter to the letter I before adding the er. So if you look at the examples here, heavy that ends in the letter y, we change the y to the letter I and then we add the er. Busy, which ends in the letter Y, we change the Y to I and add ER. So with most descriptive adjectives that take the ER, if they end in Y, we change the Y to I before adding the ER. Again, as with the doubling of the consonants, this has no effect on pronunciation. This is purely a spelling rule.